There are people who always sort of message me and say, oh no, but this is going below retail and that is going below retail. But I mean, reality is that your Pateks, your VCs, your Langes, I mean, the bulk of them go for significant discounts to retail. If you're into watches, this past weekend has been quite important and exciting with the Geneva Watch Auctions. Both Phillips and Christies brought their A game, resulting in crazy watches going at millions of dollars. While I think you should always take auction results with a grain of salt, it's still a pretty good opportunity to tell how the watch market is currently doing. You get to see which brands are currently still hot, such as F.P.Journe, and which ones might not be doing quite as well, like Bethune or Gronefeld. Also, as a person who loves independent watchmaking, it's quite exciting seeing some watches appear on market for the first time, like the Simon Brette. Today, I'll be having a casual chat, running you through everything that you need to know about the Geneva Watch Auctions, as well as my personal highlights. Let's jump into it. So for those of you that don't already know, I help to run a pre-owned watch platform called Legacy Watch Co., which focuses on independent watch brands. So as a result, I'm personally more interested in things like F.P.Journe, MB&F, Bethune, Urwerk, and some of the more niche independent watchmakers as well. You can navigate to what you're interested in hearing about using the chapters in this video. Naturally, I think the best place to start is with F.P.Journe. Based on the auction results, as well as what we see from the market, F.P.Journe is probably the single best performing watch brand when it comes to market prices and watches trading above their retail value. Even if you look at the Christie's auction, there was an F.P.Journe display box that went for 27,000 Swiss francs, which is higher than what some of the Bethunes even achieved. Now, I think both Phillips and Christies did an amazing job curating this year's selection at the Geneva Watch Auctions, and there were plenty of crazy F.P.Journes that went up on market. But I think beyond the sort of incredibly rare and special F.P.Journes, the results that interest me a bit more are the ones for what you'd consider sort of production F.P.Journes and things that, I guess, not regular people, but are still available at retail today, provided you have a relationship with their boutique. So one good example would be the Blacktail Elegante, which auctioned at Phillips for 82,000 Swiss francs, which is in the six-figure range, at least in Sing dollar terms. So just for reference, I think last year we sold one of these watches in brand new condition in the USD 60K range. And that was market at the time. So seeing it grow so exponentially, even though, in theory, the Elegante would be one of the most highly supplied Journes, I mean, it's just frankly crazy. Beyond that, we also had a F.P.Journe Chronometer Blue that went for 94,000 Swiss francs at Christie's. And this is sort of a weird result for me because it's much higher than what you would find on market. Even if you were to go on Chrono24 today, you're going to find Chronometer Blues for much cheaper than that. But I guess regardless, probably shows the demand as well. And one final one that I found quite interesting was F.P.Journe Resonance RQ in platinum. So last year we sold two of these, and interestingly enough, this result at Christie's, I believe, is also quite a good chunk above current market prices as far as we know. So I guess it's good to see F.P.Journes continue to chug along. One of the questions I think that we get the most from clients that visit us is whether this sort of F.P.Journe trend will last. A lot of them ask whether it's just a temporary wave and we'll see prices correct down, or whether they'll continue to go up. I think ultimately it's very hard to say with these sorts of things because even with something like the Elegante, when we sold it last year, I already thought that the price was frankly very high for what the watch is. So for it to almost double in value since then is already crazy to me. And I think a good way of looking at this is in terms of sheer demand and supply. Now, the problem when it comes to demand and supply, at least in Singapore, is that supply is incredibly limited. For those of you that aren't aware, the only way to get a F.P.Journe at retail in Singapore is through the hourglass. Not only are allocations extremely hard to come by, but the people who get them usually just don't want to sell them either, because I'm sure that if Mike Tay were to find out, he's going to blacklist the entirety of your bloodline for the rest of time. That being said, if I had to guess, I do think there is some sort of limit on where prices can go, because at the end of the day, the people who buy F.P.Journes, they aren't stupid. If the prices go, for example, 10 times what they paid for, I assume that you're going to see a lot more supply come out on market, and market prices, depending on how demand is, would probably adjust downwards. And even on the buying side, I would say that prices for F.P.Journes currently, it just doesn't make them a value buy anymore. You have brands like, I guess Patek would be the best example, where you could spend the same amount of money as you would on an Elegante, but get a precious metal perpetual calendar. So I do think there's probably an extent to which F.P.Journe prices can be sustained. The next big brand that I'll be talking about is MB&F, and this one is my personal favorite, as well as the brand that we have the most experience with. I think in the past 8 months or so, we've sold about 11 MB&Fs, a lot of them being the perpetual calendars and higher quantum sort of models. But with this set of auctions, I was quite pleasantly surprised by the results. I think as far as Phillips goes, they had a legacy machine perpetual Evo that went for about 15% above market, which is a pleasantly surprising result. I think the HM6 result was also quite solid. The main point of controversy would probably be the LM1 at Christie's. And in my opinion, it's not controversial, but essentially there was a collector, a rather prominent collector on Instagram that sort of flagged this one out and said, MB&F's fall of grace or whatever. For me, I think I'm not really sure what they're talking about, because generally with MB&Fs, you always expect them to trade below retail. It's just that they're much more liquid than some of the other brands like Urwerk and Bethune. And also, I think with this particular LM1 in rose gold, it has never been one of the more popular MB&F models, for one, due to the size, and second, due to the color combination of rose gold and silver dial, which is more on the dressy side of things. But ultimately, I think if you look at these three watches, I would say that the MB&F market is still pretty solid, and at least from what we see on our side, it's pretty good as well. So earlier this week, we saw the LM1 in platinum, and currently our white gold perpetual is reserved as well by a client. So I think definitely there is demand there. I suppose that the most interesting brand to talk about in this set of auctions is, I think, as I've alluded to, Bethune. And this one's interesting because at the Christie's auction, we had a set of 16 Bethunes come up on market together. Now, talking to people in the industry, some have speculated that it's actually Watchbox selling their own stock of Bethunes. And since I can neither confirm nor deny it, I won't really comment personally, but neither do I think it really matters. If you've watched one of my previous videos, I essentially said that, for us as a watch dealer, the issue with Bethune is that when people come and consign them to us, it's very hard to pinpoint the exact market price. At the end of the day, since the brand is owned by Watchbox or 1916, and they have a lot of the pre-owned stock, it's in their best interest to list them as high as possible, even if they don't move. I think that way, at least the people who go to them and buy at retail prices at least look at those supposed asking prices and think, oh, it's a good investment, so it's worth buying at retail. But for the longest time, or I've at least been saying that the actual transaction prices of Bethunes are a good chunk below retail. And I think that this set of auctions sort of proves that. If you were to focus on the more recent modern stuff, I think like the DB28 XS Starry Seas or some of the steel wheels, or the DB25 Stradivarius, it's pretty clear from this set of results that de Bethune's trade below retail. Even for things like the flagship kind of blue, which people were fighting for over allocations, is going way below as well. So we had a 28XP kind of blue that went for 75,000 Swiss francs, which as far as I know is a good chunk below retail. We also had a DB28 steel wheels kind of blue, which is an hourglass special edition that went for 88,000 Swiss francs, which in my opinion is a fantastic value buy. Now, some of you probably listen to what I'm talking about, as well as the clickbait title, which I'm sure doesn't help, and think that, oh no, de Bethune is dumping. But in my opinion, it's actually not. I would say that when you look at the world of independent watches in general, you would expect a lot of them to sell below retail. I mean, like I've mentioned before, MB&F, which I consider a stronger brand, is basically below retail across all of its catalog. I think with exception to some of the rare sort of highly desirable stuff. And at least in this case, we get a good sort of benchmark, whether you're looking to buy or sell a de Bethune, as to where exactly the market price is. So for example, maybe with something like a Starry Seas, you'd expect a certain amount below retail, things like that. But ultimately, I would say that my main message is that if you're looking to buy a de Bethune now, just be aware that the current retail prices are very high for what you're getting, and market isn't there. So, I still think their watches are amazing for what they are. There are some exceptional pieces out there. But if you're looking to add one to your collection, I'd suggest looking more on the secondary market and not being too influenced by those, super high asking prices, before you actually make a decision and add one yourself. Now, I think curiously, there weren't any earworks this auction, and maybe that is for the better. But as a result, I think it's good to talk about some of the more niche independent brands that appeared on this round of auctions. I think for me, the one that is probably most interesting is Voutilainen, or Kari Voutilainen. And it's an intriguing one because typically you don't really see these watches appear on open market. And as a result, it's a bit more unclear where exactly the market prices are at. I mean, usually they appear on auction and you can benchmark it from there. But other than that, it's genuinely quite hard to say. And additionally, basically all Voutilainens out there have some customization of some kind, making them basically all piece uniques. So it's very hard to value that aspect as well. But at least for the Christies and Phillips results, I would say that these are incredibly strong. The Christies one especially so, and that is, I would say, a pleasant surprise. One other one that I found quite interesting is the Gronefeld Gronograaf. And so this result is a bit sad, I would say, for the seller because, I mean, all the prices I've included here are with buyer's premium. And so the seller would have gotten quite screwed if based on the current retail price. I mean, he would have lost a significant percentage. Now, this isn't really a surprise to us. I've been telling clients for a long time that sort of Gronefeld market prices have generally been on the downtrend. But I feel this one is an interesting result because as far as I know, it's probably the first time a Gronograaf has come up on auction. Ultimately, I do think it's quite a sad result because I've seen a Gronograaf in person and I do think it's a sublime watch. It's probably one of my top 3 chronographs I've ever seen, and to see it achieve this sort of result, I mean, it's honestly not even too far off an Elegante, which if you just think about that and let it sink in, that's crazy. Another interesting one is the Roger Smith Series 1 that appeared at Phillips. So I think Roger Smith is a very interesting topic and probably one that warrants a video of its own one day, although I'm not sure I'm knowledgeable enough to talk about it in depth. But at least for this particular result, based on what a fellow collector who owns basically the same piece told me, this current result or this latest result is about 10% less than what he paid for his at retail. And so I mean, yeah, the Roger Smith topic is interesting because he's basically used auction prices, which many have suggested are manipulated, to set his own sky-high retail prices. Whether it will last and whether people will still pick up their watches, I'm not sure, but it'll be an interesting one to monitor. On a similar vein, I would say that another pretty interesting one is the Simon Brette Chronometer Artisans. I mean, this is a watch that I've personally been raving about for the longest time. I've seen 2 different variations of them, and at least in my opinion, it's perhaps one of the best time-only watches out there. And this is the first time we get to see one on auction, which, it's gone for, I think, several times, or about 2 or 3 times above its retail price. Now, this isn't actually the first time a Simon Brette has transacted, although I guess the previous instance was in a private sale. So basically, one of the collectors that bought the subscription piece flipped his for, I believe, about 5 to 6 times what he paid for. Now, I'm not too sure if there's really much I would personally take away from this result because, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of vested interest with this watch, and it's the first time it's appearing in a high-profile auction. But at the end of the day, I don't know. I think Simon Brette is an interesting one because I've talked to the man himself over a call, and I would say he's one of the most fantastic people within the watch industry that I've talked to. It's actually quite interesting because he's very selective in who he sells the watches to. So generally, knowing other people who have them on order or who have already purchased one, these are collectors that generally don't sell their watches. And I think it's unlikely that you're going to see a bunch of Simon Brettes suddenly appearing on market. Either way, it's a good result, and I'm very happy for the brand as a whole. The last 2 that I'll quickly talk about are the Haldimann Central Tourbillon as well as the Krayon. Now, the Haldimann I had the pleasure of videoing recently, or at least shooting quick clips, and it's absolutely insanely gorgeous. Again, talking to the collector after this auction happened, the final auction result is also higher than what he paid for, which I would say is a pleasant sign. I mean, talking to some people that visited us recently, apparently if you want to order a Haldimann today, the waiting time is about, I think they said 5 years, which I would assume that there are people out there willing to pay a premium to just get the watch immediately. Oh, and also you have to put a 50% deposit or maybe 30%, somewhere along those lines, which is not ideal because of opportunity cost and so on. The other one is Krayon, and also similarly, I had the pleasure of photographing one. I think for me, just one of the most underrated independent watches there is. And yeah, I would say the result is pretty solid. I think with this one, it's interesting because it's a watch that you can still order brand new if you should wish. I mean, we know a lot of clients from the Hourglass that are still getting this sort of watch allocated to them, albeit in different sort of variations. But ultimately, I think it's a decent result. And, with pieces like this, generally, I would say that, watches aren't an investment, but at best, you would, or my point of view is that I don't have infinite money, unfortunately, to buy watches. So if I were to make such a substantial purchase, I would at least want to limit the amount that I lose. And I think this result is pretty decent. I think I'll just briefly touch on some of the more mainstream brands before I end this video because, well, I'm aware that the bulk of this has been spent talking about niche brands that most people probably have never heard about. My issue with talking about things like Rolexes or Pateks, especially sports watches at these auctions, is that the results are often just entirely meaningless. I mean, there was a 5712 that went way above what we know what market is. I mean, if you wanted, I could source one today and save you tens of thousands of dollars compared to what this person paid at auction. But that being said, what I found interesting is that at least for Pateks, dress watches, especially those of older generations like the 5970, are still performing very well. This is a big contrast to some of the more modern dress watches where the discount to retail is quite significant. I mean, if you look at this 5270P in green dial, I mean, that's quite a substantial discount to retail, and I'm sure the seller probably isn't too happy about it. There were also some interesting other brands, I would say, such as the Cartier Crash. So for those of you that don't know, the NSO program, which allows for people to customize certain Cartiers, has been discontinued. And we saw some ridiculous results for the Crash going on in auction. Personally, it's not something I've ever fully understood, and I do think this latest set of results are a bit out of line as well, but I won't delve too much deeper into it than that. So overall, I hope that you've enjoyed my rambling through this video. I think typically I will do everything off a script, but I just thought that it would be fun to just have more of a casual chat about the auction results and sharing some brief thoughts about them. I think if you look at the auction results as a whole, indies are still honestly performing quite well. I mean, yeah, there are people who always sort of message me and say, oh no, but this is going below retail and that is going below retail. But I mean, reality is that your Pateks, your VCs, your Langes, I mean, the bulk of them go for significant discounts to retail. So let's say a 20% discount to retail for something like a Bethune in comparison is actually very good. And I think one other thing to mention is that at least from what we see in the market, or although I guess it could be a bit different since we've already built our niche around independence, is that these watches are, or I'm pleasantly surprised by how liquid some of these watches are. I mean, especially for some of the rarer independents like a Ketelars or Ruben Scoots, and even some of the MB&F, stuff like that, they all move quite quickly, especially when you consider the value of them. And talking to some of the dealers in Singapore that that deal with stuff like your Rolex sports watches, things like that, they've really seen business drop off. So it's nice to see that this segment of the market is still quite resilient. And I do think to a heavy extent, the auction results back that up. Anyways, thank you for watching, and do check out the other videos if you're interested. Also, if you're ever in Singapore, feel free to come visit me at our Collectors Lounge, or check out our website if you're looking to buy or sell a watch. Thank you for watching.